first start by clarifying that there was two versions of the test, and it was not necessarily test A and test B. Here's test A, but if you look at your test, on the actual test itself, if you had a dot after the 9, then technically you had version B, even though it said test A. So that's just a sneaky way of me giving you different types of tests, right? So I think the majority of us did have test A in this class, but some of us may had a version B. So we're going to go over test A. Maybe later I'll do a video of version B. And on this video specifically, we're doing the even ones. And the idea is for me to do the even ones right now, and then you guys have the rest of the period to do the odd ones. And if you guys need help, there will be the odd number video uploaded later to my YouTube channel and to Edmodo. So here we go. Number 2. 2 is really easy because the A value is 1. If the A value is 1, you could jump right into the shortcut of factoring. And all you do, I hope you guys remember, is think what times what is the C value that if I combine together is the B value. And again, you can only do this when your A value is 1, okay, when there is no number right here. So anyways, what times what is negative 28 that if you add together, that if you combine together is negative 3? Now, don't give me an answer. Tell me what times what is negative 28 that if you combine together is negative 3? Negative 7 times 4 is correct. Now, if you're struggling with that, make a list. How could you get negative 28? Well, you could get it by going negative 1 times 28, negative 2 times 14, negative 3 doesn't work, negative 4 doesn't work. Wait, negative 4 does work, right? Negative 4 times 7. And that's about it. So when you look at your possibilities of multiplying to get negative 28, all you got to do is combine them and see which one gives you that negative 3. So if you combine these guys, it gives you a 27. That's not a 27, it's a negative 3. If you combine these guys, it's a 12. That's not a 12, it's a negative 3. If you combine these guys, you do get a positive 3, which there is a 3, but it's not positive, it's negative, which means we have the right number, we just have the wrong sign, which means that we have the right numbers, we just have the wrong signs. So let's change that to a positive 4 and a negative 7, and then you're good to go. Just plug in that plus 4 right there and that minus 7 right there. And we're done. We just need to identify which one's the correct one, and it is B. Right here, B. It doesn't have to be n plus 4 first and then n minus 7 second. It could be switched around, n minus 7 and n plus 4. So the correct answer is B. Let's jump to number 4. The first method that we learned of factoring is pulling out the GCF. That's the first method you should always try to do. So if you take a look at that binomial, there is a multiple of 4, right? So if you pull out a 4, 4 times what gets you a 16p squared? 4 times 4p squared gets you a 16p squared. And then 4 times what gets you a negative 36? 4 times negative 9 gets you a negative 36. Now if you left it like that, it's not fully correct. You still need to look at the inside of the parentheses and continue factoring. So I hope we all recognize that on the inside of the parentheses, we do have a perfect square term and a perfect square term. It's a perfect square binomial, right? A difference of 2 squares, which means that I could square root both of them and plug them into my factored form answer format. So what is the square root of 4p squared? 2p. What's the square root of 9? 3. So you put the 2p and the 3 on both binomials, and now what signs have to be here and here in order for the middle term to cancel out? Plus. 1 negative, 1 plus. 1 plus, 1 negative, right? So let's put 1 plus, 1 minus. Doesn't matter which one's plus, which one's minus. And let's not forget about the outside 4. That needs to come down as well. And ladies and gentlemen, that's your answer. And if we look for that answer, it is answer C. Let's jump to number 6. Again, a really easy one. Why? Because the A value is 1. And whenever the A value is 1, you could jump right into the shortcut, setting up your factored form format, parentheses with the x's. Why could we set this up? Because x times x is x squared. If you had a 6 right here, a 4, a 5, then you wouldn't be able to set this up. All right? So now all we think is what times what is negative 24 that if I combine together is negative 10? Again, What times what is the C value that if I combine together is B?
Negative 2 times 12.
Negative 1 times 12. Negative 2 times 12.
Or wait.
Okay.
Negative 2 times 12.
How about this? What you should do, if you're slightly confused, what you should do is make a list of the multiples of your C value. Negative 1 times 24. Negative 2 times 12. Negative 3 times 8. Negative 4 times 6. Those are all the possible ways of getting negative 24, multiplying, besides changing signs. So which pair of numbers, when you add them together, gives you a negative 10?
Negative 2 times.
Okay, so the negative 2 and the 12, if I combine those together, it'll give me a positive 10, and we know that we want a negative 10, so we have the right number, we just have the wrong sign.
2 times 12.
So we're going to make that a positive 2 and a negative 12. So positive 2 right here, negative 12 right there, and we are done. Which answer is it? None of those. So we put option E, none of those. Jumping to number 8. Now number 8, I wish I could set this up. I wish I could set this up, n right there and n right there, but I can't. Because n times n is not 4n squared. So I cannot set this up. I need to go with a multi-step method, right? Now, if you don't remember the multi-step method, step 1 is to multiply a times c. So a is 4, c is negative 6. So a times c is negative 24. That's your answer for step 1. Step 2 is to think of the multiples of that answer from step 1, negative 24, that combine together to give you the b value, which is positive 5. So let's make a list. Negative 1 times 24, negative 2 times 12, negative 3 times 8, negative 4 times 6. Those are all the possible ways of multiplying numbers together to give you negative 24. Now, the question is, which of these pair of numbers combines together to give us the middle value 5? The negative 3 and the positive 8. If you add those together, it really does give you a positive 5. So these are the right numbers with the right signs. Everything's right. Now, you could, at this point, rewrite your trinomial as a 4-term polynomial by changing the 5n to become negative 3n plus 8n. And then you could factor by grouping, which takes a long time and is kind of challenging. So the magical shortcut, if you remember that, step 3 is to simply plug it into your factored form format with an ax here and an ax there. Don't write the a, because we are actually going to write the a value. Let me erase that a. What is the a value on this quadratic trinomial? It's right here. What is it? It's 4. So instead of ax, I'm actually going to write 4x and 4x. Now we know that this is technically wrong. Why is it technically wrong? Because 4x times 4x is not 4n squared. I should have put n's. I'm sorry. Let me change those to n's. 4n and 4n. Sorry about that. But anyway, we know it's wrong. We're going to have to magically divide the step 4 at the very end. But anyways, right now, what do I do with these blank spots? That's right. The negative 3 and the positive 8, we fill them in right there. So let's take that minus 3, put it there. Take the positive 8, put it there. And here's the fourth, what I call magical step, to simply look at your binomial and divide by whatever you can that's in common. So the 4 and the 3, they have nothing in common. That means I cannot divide by anything, so it stays the same, 4n minus 3. Now the other one, I have a 4n and an 8. What could I divide both of those by? 2. So 4n becomes 2. Actually, yeah. Instead of dividing by 2, the greatest value to divide by would be 4. So let's divide by 4, and we will get single n, or you can put a 1, but you don't need it, and then plus 2. So that's the final factored form right there on number 8, and that is which answer? None of the above again. Dang, there was a lot of none of the above on this one. Let's jump to the back side, number 10. So you need to show your work on all these, even on the multiple choice. And by the way, guys, I saw some people with perfect work done differently than what I showed them. Right? And it's photo math, right? Maybe I don't catch you during class, but I see the work done a different way. I didn't show you that way. I see the work done a different way. and even the notation's done a different way, exactly the way Photomath does it. If that's the case, I'm going to ask you to prove it to me that you know how to do it. Now, if you know how to do it, you learned it a different way, that's great. As long as you're able to explain it, I'll give you the credit. But if I see the perfect work done a different way and you're not able to explain it, you're not going to get the credit. So please make sure you're thorough with your work and you are able to back it up if I ask you to. Number 10, we need a factor. You're always supposed to try to pull out the GCF first. You can't pull out the GCF. There is no GCF here. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, well, I have a perfect square term here and a perfect square term there. Maybe I could do the shortcuts. And the square root of 4x squared is 2x and the square root of 25 is 5. But think about this, guys. You need a minus sign here in order for that to work. Because in order for you to get a positive 25 at the end of your distribution, you'd have to have a positive 5 times a positive 5. That'd give you a positive 25. But if you have both positives, it'll give you a middle term, and there is no middle term here. Or it could be both negatives, but that would also give you a middle term. So right here, it's as simple as this. You cannot factor it. It's not factorable. I would like you to write prime or not factorable on number 10. Okay? Now, if this would have been a minus sign, if it would have been 4x squared minus 25, then yes, you would have been able to square root both terms and gotten a 2x plus 5 and a 2x minus 5. If you'd have a difference of two squares. If it were a minus sign, yeah, you could square root both and plug them into your answer format, put 1 plus, 1 minus. But it's not a minus, it's a plus, which means you can't do it, which means it's prime. Let's jump to number 12. Super easy. Why is that? Because the a value is 1. Okay. If the a value is 1, you could jump right into your factored form format, x and x. Why? Because x times x is that first x squared term. Now, after that, you make a list. You think what times what is negative 56, the c value, that if you combine together gives you a negative 1, which is the b value. So does anybody see it right off the bat? What times what is negative 56 that if you add together is negative 1?
8 times 7.
8 times 7, but which one's positive, which one's negative?
Negative 7.
Negative 8 and positive 7. Right, negative 8 and positive 7. Now, if you're struggling, you might want to make a list. How could you get negative 56, negative 1 times 56? Whoops, sorry. Negative 2 times 28. Negative 3 doesn't work. Negative 4 times 14, I think. Negative 5 doesn't work. Negative 7 times 8. So then you should see that negative 7 and 8 gives you a positive 1. You want a negative 1. So you have to change the signs, get a positive 7 and a negative 8. And this is your correct factored form for number 12. Let's jump to number 14. Now number 14, that one's challenging because the a value is not 1. So you're going to have to use that multi-step process. You can't pull out a GCF. Let's jump right into it. Step 1 is to multiply a times c. Now what is a? Wait a minute. What's an easier way of doing this long method? Square rooting. If you do have a perfect square term in the front and a perfect square term in the back, perfect square term, it's a great idea to try to just square root them, plug them into your factored form answer format, and see if they work. So the square root of 4y squared is 2y, and the square root of 25 is 5. So you have a 2y and a 5. Now the question is, what signs belong in here? Now if you have the same exact terms, and one's plus and one's minus, that means that the middle term would eliminate. So it can't be plus or minus or plus. They're either both pluses or both minuses. What do you say?
Pluses.
If you think they're both pluses, then everything's positive, right? And that middle term is negative. So if everything's positive, how are you going to end up with the middle term being negative? So it makes sense that both of them should be negative, right? And of course, you're supposed to check it. If you go 2y times 2y, you get the 4y squared. If you go 2y times negative 5, that's negative 10y. If you go negative 5 times 2y, that's another negative 10y. And that's how you get the negative 20y in the middle when you combine those two negative 10y's. Anyway, that's the correct factored form. That's the answer. You could write it like this on your answer sheet as a binomial squared. Or you could leave it like this, whatever you want. Let's jump to number 16. On number 16 through 20, that's where we're starting to solve. We now have equations. A lot of people left them in factored form. I didn't ask you to factor. You're supposed to factor, but what I want are some actual answers to the equations. So I do have an equal sign. It's equal to 0. And I do have something times something equals 0, which means I could use the zero product property. So I could separate them and make them each equal to 0. That's what I'm going to do. I want to write 3x plus 12 and say that that equals 0. And I want to have 3x minus 1 and say that that equals 0. So when I solve the first equation, I subtract 12. I will have 3x equals negative 12. My final step would be to divide by 3 and divide by 3. So I'll get x equals negative 4. That's one answer. The other one, I am going to add 1. You're going to end up with 3x equaling 1. Final step would be to divide by 3. So x equals 1/3. Those are your two answers for number 16.
How did you want us to write it?
You could either write it like this, x equals negative 4, and x equals 1/3, or you could write them together, like x equals negative 4 and 1/3. Okay, or you could put it negative 4 comma 1/3. As long as I see a negative 4 and a 1/3, that's great. If you leave it in factored form, you didn't finish the question. You didn't finish solving. I need actual answers. So number 18. It's an equation, ladies and gentlemen. It's not equal to 0, so it would be great to set it equal to 0. And another thing you could do by just looking at all your terms on this equation, they're all divisible by what? 2. So if you wanted to, you could divide everything by 2, because an equation you can do anything you want as long as you do it to both sides, as long as you do it to every single term. So by dividing everything by 2, it'll make it easier. It'll become an x squared equals 10 plus 9x. And I would still set it equal to 0 by moving everything over. So check this out. I'm going to do 2 steps in one. I want to get rid of the 9x by subtracting 9x and subtracting 9x. What I do to one side, I do to the other. And I'm also going to get rid of that 10 by subtracting 10 and subtracting 10, right? Now notice I didn't actually do this because I cannot subtract 9x's from x squares. I cannot subtract 10 from negative 9x. So all I'm going to do is rewrite this as a quadratic trinomial, x squared minus 9x minus 10, and it's going to equal 0 because I canceled them out. So here's my new equation, x squared minus 9x minus 10 equals 0. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a quadratic trinomial that could easily be factored because the a value is 1. So all I need to do is set this up, put an x there, and then think what times what is negative 10 that if I combine together is negative 9. So what is that? What times what is negative 10 that if I combine together is negative 9? Is it negative 5 times 2? No. What is it? What times what is negative 10 that if you add together is negative 9? 10 and 1. Which one's positive, which one's negative? Negative 10 and a positive 1. So we factored this correctly, but we still need to split it and solve. So I have something times something equals 0. I want to say that this first something could be equal to 0, and the second something could also be equal to 0. That's a zero product property at work there. So we're going to solve both of these. Add 10 to both sides, and you will get x equals 10. That's one answer. Subtract 1. You'll get x equals negative 1. That's another answer. So those are your two answers for number 18. Let's go to the final question on this test, number 20. And there's different ways of doing this. Let me go with the easiest, shortest, quickest method. If you do have one single x, like as in just x squared, there is no other x over here or no other x being added or subtracted. If it's only one single x on your equation, get that x by itself. So if I wanted to get rid of the 64 that's being multiplied by x squared, I could get rid of it by doing the opposite, dividing by 64. So what do I have left? I have an x squared equaling 9 divided by 64. Now to get rid of a square, I do the opposite of a square, which is a square root. So do a square root there and a square root there, but you need to remember that whenever you apply a square root in an equation, you have to put plus or minus in front of your answer. Okay? So the square root and the square, they undid themselves. It's just x. I need to put a plus minus right in front of my answer, but I could actually do the square root of 9/64 by splitting that square root and doing the square root of 9 over the square root of 64. And the square root of 9 really is 3, and the square root of 64 really is 8. So my answer is x equals plus or minus 3/8. You could have written it like that, or you could have said x equals positive 3/8 and also negative 3/8. But you could just put plus or minus, and that represents your two answers for number 20. So I'm sorry, it's been a long video. We've done all the even ones. I expect you to go back right now in class and do all the odd ones. And if you're struggling with that, check my YouTube channel. There'll be a video uploaded for the odd ones. Once again, guys, the test this week is going to be a retake. It's going to be the same exact questions, just with different values.